Okay, great. Okay, everyone, let's get started. Thank you all for coming. My name is Matt Vella. I'm going to have trouble knowing where to look, so I may be squirming around in my seat to make eye contact with all of you. I'm an editor at Time magazine. I want to welcome you all to this session. This is a what if session. What if we become superhuman? The premise is that pharmacology, genetic engineering, robotics, all promise treatments that go beyond sort of therapy as we know it. And we're here to discuss, what might happen if human enhancement become essential to competing with our peers for jobs or top grades, and what the implications of that might be. These sessions are a collaboration between Time and the Forum. They ask questions that sound a little bit like science fiction, but many of them are becoming science fact very quickly. And the point is to really just go beyond the crisis of the moment, the headlines of the moment, and try to look a little bit into the future at issues that we may be facing down the road. We're going to take some questions about halfway through the session, so if you have anything you want to ask our panelists as they're talking, just note it down and I will get to that. And we've also asked some poll questions of the public. We've been polling for about 10 days online, on Time, and we're going to ask all of you with an old-fashioned show of hands. And luckily I have some very brilliant scientists up here who can help me with the counting, because I certainly wouldn't be able to do it on my own. So I wanted to ask everyone to just briefly introduce themselves, tell us your name and what you're working on currently, and then I'll come back around with some initial questions and we'll take a look at the poll to warm up the room. So why don't we start here?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nita Farahany. I'm a professor of law and philosophy at Duke University, where I also direct the Duke Initiative for Science and Society. I'm working on a book about roughly cognitive enhancement, but the kind of broad ability to be able to change our brains.
Hi, everyone. My name is Girish Ramachandran. I work for the Tata Group, Tata Consultancy Services, one of the largest software consultancy firms in the world today. And we are working on some very interesting work on automation and artificial intelligence, because we genuinely believe that is going to be the future of our work.
Okay, great. Nina?
Hi, I'm Nina Tandon. I'm co-founder and CEO of a company called EpiBone, biomedical engineer by training. And we use stem cells, patient stem cells, to grow skeletal implants, bone and cartilage, to help displace synthetic implants.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mart Saarma. I'm the professor of neuroscience at the University of Helsinki. I'm working on brain, actually trying to understand why our neurons die, and then also to understand, can we prevent the death? I'm at the same time also representing here European Research Council. I'm serving as a vice president for the life science domain, and the ones who don't know what is European Research Council, this is a European agency which is supporting frontier research. And we don't do that only in Europe, we support it globally.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. I wanted to start with our poll questions to get a sense of what people feel like. So the first question we asked the public, I'm going to ask you before we show you the results, is would you habitually take smart pills if they were proven to be medically safe? How many would, yes, take smart pills if they did not lead to addiction? Okay, we have a tentative couple of yeses over here on this side of the room. Okay, what do we think? That's about 50-50? Does that correct my math? 50-50. Okay, let's see what the public thought. Yes, 86%. Okay, so maybe our audience doesn't need smart pills as much as the general public, or doesn't feel that they need smart pills as much as the general public. But okay, second question. Would it be cheating for students to undergo performance-enhancing brain therapy before an exam? Would it be cheating for students to undergo performance-enhancing brain therapy before an exam? Who thinks this would be cheating? Okay. Maybe about 30-40% of the audience. Let's see what the public said. No. 70. Okay, the public is bullish on smart pills and performance enhancing.
Around 30%
Yeah. All right. And the final question, the third question rather, is if an employee trained their own robot to do part of their work for them, should they be paid more or less than a colleague who does all of their own work by themselves? So should they be paid more? Who thinks someone who Tom Sawyer's a robot into painting the fence for them should be paid more? Okay, all right. Overwhelmingly believe that they should be paid more. Okay, let's see what the public thought. 58%. Okay, so we have agreement. How many? We didn't ask this, but how many people would then fire that person? Maybe don't raise your hands. It's not a bad question. So.
And just employ the robot?
Yeah. So, all right, Nita, I wanted to start with you. We came in very late last night. We happened to be on the same shuttle bus around 2 a.m. And you were back here at 6:45 or 7 a.m.
Yes.
I'm going to be nice to start the panel so that we don't have a row right off the bat, but and not ask you if you are on any performance-enhancing drugs at this panel.
I am.
Okay.
So far, just caffeine, but I do carry with me modafinil, so I just didn't take it.
Yes, which I hadn't known much about, and you explained that drug to me, and I hope we can come to it and what it does for people. Maybe do a little advertising section, but I think
I don't sell it. No stake or interest in it.
I think my first question for you is how well articulated is the sort of ethical and moral ground or framework around these issues of enhancement, just generally speaking? Do we really know what's at stake? Do we have a good sense?
So I'd say it's certainly incredibly well debated. There have been quite a few ethical bodies, including I sit on President Obama's Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues. We took up a 2-volume report on the BRAIN Initiative, one part of which looked at cognitive enhancement. Lots of different bodies have laid out what some of the ethical issues are. But is it clearly articulated? Is there any consensus in society as to how to think about these things? I don't think so. Mm-hmm. But do we know what the major issues are that people grapple with? I think so.
Yes.
And so, some of them are the kinds of questions you ask. Is it cheating? Is it the equivalent of sports? So we're against doping in sports. Is it the same thing if we're doping our brains? There's the question of if we think that cognitive enhancement is somehow wrong, is it only wrong in certain instances, right? Is there a difference between therapy for people who are taking medicines for therapeutic purposes or drugs or devices or anything else for therapeutic purposes versus people who are doing it to augment above their innate capabilities? Or is that all arbitrary, right? Because I bet most people here today had a cup of caffeine of some sort. Or 6 like I did. They might have vitamins they take. They may have good nutrition. They may have various techniques of meditation that they use in order to improve their cognition. All of those things are cognitive enhancements. All of those things give us advantages relative to other people. And so where do you draw the line? Is there some difference between some things versus other things?
Right. So I hope we will dig into some of those issues because they're great. Now moving to you, I want to ask you, as a consultant, would you counsel that a company should, let's say an engineer, for instance, hypothetical scenario. Sure. A company has a decision between hiring an engineer who is on a performance-enhancing drug and has 60% greater output than one who isn't. Would you counsel companies to stay away from employees who are enhanced, whatever that may be, or to experiment with that kind of?
For experimentation purposes, maybe I would.
Yeah.
But for the real life, I'm not sure whether I would do it. Okay. Simply because I don't know, but we need to answer the ethical question whether what we are doing is right, and is it morally right to do something like this. Okay. Mm-hmm. So already, in our industry, we see a lot of automation coming through, and that is going to disrupt already a lot of jobs. Okay. So if it is going to look at the overall job scenario in the world, and if it is going to, it's like, I just want to put the same question. If it's like what we had recently about Maria Sharapova. Okay. We need to see what the outcome is. Okay.
Yeah.
If the outcome is is debatable, then I don't know whether I would go about doing it.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Great. Nina, go. Yes.
Yeah, maybe I just comment
Sure.
that quite interestingly, quite a number of world-class sportsmen
Right.
have actually mutations in certain genes, either in the erythropoietin gene or in the receptor gene.
Or they have fast twitch muscle fibers instead of slow twitch muscle fibers.
What do you then do then?
I agree.
They have naturally it. They have already natural advantage for that. We have in Finland one very famous skier who had, he's blue from face, but his erythropoietin is totally up, and he has won 4 Olympic medals.
So, I mean, I think that touches on a fundamental question here, which is, does enhancement level the playing field? So if potentially, let's say you could edit your genetic code to have better twitch fibers or have better lung capacity, is that a leveling of the playing field, or is that an unfair unbalancing of it?
Well, it's probably unbalancing. And there is another aspect, and that is that we know only the surface of the physiology of brain enhancement. Actually, we know very, very little. We know mostly the regions where things are happening, but we know very, very little about the essential mechanism. If you ask me, would I take a pill? So my question is, I don't know, what is a pill?
A pill?
Yeah, what kind of pill should I take?
Modafinil.
Because understanding of the physiology is so limited.
Right.
Yes.
Well, so I don't know if you wanted to have Nina pipe in for a moment,
Did
then
you have
I want
a
to answer
special
that.
question for me? Because this is really interesting.
They're all special questions. But what do you think? Do you think, I mean, you're actually pushing, the science forward. Do you think the consequences are well understood, the sort of leveling of the plate?
Yeah, I don't think we understand. I mean, luckily for us, we sort of sidestep in regenerative medicine. We get a chance to sidestep this issue for a little while longer because it's still a bit of a hypothetical question. Can we grow body parts that are, right now, we're just trying to catch up to what nature can do. And so for a while, we get the chance to just, I think similar to people in AI, to get a chance to say, oh, we're just trying to catch up to what nature can do. But eventually, it's going to catch up to us, and we'll have to start answering these questions. Do we want to enhance and do more than what nature can do at the moment?
Right, can you make unbreakable bones?
Exactly.
I want to have you jump
Body
in.
modifications, or for vanity's sake. It's not just for performance, I think, as well.
How eventual is eventually on the catching up, do you think? Are we talking about 20 years, 30 years?
I think it depends what type of enhancement you're talking about. In terms of the brain, we're not, bones and skin, for example, is quite easy to grow in the lab, and there have been products on the market since the late 90s. So you can help treat people who are burn victims and so on. And as you get more and more complex, the tissues get more and more difficult to grow. And so bone is somewhere in the middle. We think we're about a year or two away from human clinical trials. Cardiac and liver is probably another decade or two after that. And then brain is really far out.
Down the line.
Well, except, so on the regenerative medicine side, right, there was a study at Stanford, a human clinical study that just came out for stroke victims where they were able to use stem cells to somehow bring function back to regions of the brain that actually had been damaged. And so, and now they're going into they're already doing a broader phase 2 clinical trial, right? So,
stem cell therapies, regenerative medicine approaches, I think, are going to, are very experimental, and we're starting to see results sometimes unexpectedly positively a lot sooner than we
But I want to bring in one other point on this about, on the, does it widen the gap or does it narrow the gap? And I'm going to take modafinil that I've mentioned a couple of times. So
wait, why don't we just take a TO and explain what that is?
Yeah, I'm going to do that first, and then I'm going to explain a kind of interesting finding from that. So modafinil is a drug that is, in most parts of the world, a prescription-based drug, although in some countries it isn't. It's a wakefulness drug that is a cognitive enhancer. It's right now prescribed primarily for people who have narcolepsy or sleep shift disorder. And it seems to be better for people who take it than something like caffeine because it doesn't have the jitters associated with it. It seems to have very few side effects except for some people who have high blood pressure may suffer from even kind of greater tachycardia, increased heart rate. But it seems to improve people's motor coordination and performance IQ above that which they would have even if they had gotten ordinary sleep every night. And so it's become a drug that a lot of people like to use for either cognitive enhancement or for jet lag or things like that. What's interesting is that in a number of the studies that have been done, they have shown that if you take the normal distribution of performance IQ and you give people modafinil, people who are above the normal, above average, they don't get that much benefit from modafinil. People who are below do. And so what happens is you take the normal curve and it goes,
So it's a leveling.
yeah, so it's a leveling of the playing field, which is, in answer to your question, maybe
Right.
it doesn't widen the gap. It depends on whether or not we have access to it. And so it's questions about access rather than questions about impact. But to their point, we don't really know how it works. We don't know really what it's doing. We don't seem to have a lot of side effects from it, but the physiology of it is pretty unclear. It's one of the few drugs that seems to have a powerful effect based on the studies, and yet we have no idea why or what it's doing.
Right. What were you going to
So I just want to remind the audience that the instrument what we have here is extremely complex. I give you just a few numbers. There are 10 in the power of 11 neurons, which make 10 in the power of 14 contacts. This is 100 times more than stars in the Milky Way. It's quite a bit.
Yeah.
So we have 10 in the power of 14 contacts in the brain. And unlike in computer, these contacts are changing. This is called brain plasticity. You can calculate what a number of changes is occurring.
Yeah.
So we are very, very far for understanding all this complexity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would also imagine that there could be, certain effects, for the liver or other organs, that side effects, for example, that might be different for long-term or short-term use. And I think it's important just to understand those, because I think part of the reason why, I think it was very carefully worded, this question that was asked at the beginning, if they were proven safe.
Right.
I think if they're proven safe, then the analogy is much more like a vitamin. Like
Right.
no one would say that you're leveling the playing field by saying folic acid is important to take before pregnancy, for example.
So if we are talking about the stem cell therapies and brain diseases, I would be very, very, very cautious in predicting when we will have the results. Because this is not a liver where you just put new cells instead of dead cells. These new brain cells have to make new contacts.
Right.
All right, well, cautious or not, though,
And
Yeah.
it's
people
like,
are using them, right? I mean, so people are using the drugs, they're using the devices, they're using neurofeedback, they're using transcranial direct current stimulation, they're using nootropics, they're using a whole host and a kind of panoply of it. So we could talk about the kind of caution people should have. We don't know what the long-term effects are. We don't know what
and the more
long-term
we
and
keep this
repeated use are.
discussion hushed, the less likely we'll have good research allocated, good people studying long-term effects. And I think, the benefits of there could be huge benefits beyond just the short term for stimulating the brain to a higher performance level for a certain period of time in terms of neuroplasticity, for example.
And
I think from another point of view is that if you look at superhuman, let's say if you want to get into a superhuman, as long as leveling is what happens, I think it is okay. But if you find that there are a section of people who are going to be extremely more knowledgeable, okay, are we not going to create a class of haves and have-nots?
Yeah.
Okay? Are we not going to bridge that? I mean, instead of bridging the gap, are we going to create a much larger space between them? Okay, and it is only a sect of people. As long as it's leveling, I completely agree with you. Okay, but if it's not leveling, and if you're going to make only a few people more intelligent than the others, okay, then we also need to look at the ecology around us. Okay, are we going to also ensure that how are these super intelligent people going to behave with the rest of us? Okay. So I think we need to have that also into perspective when we talk about this. Okay.
Right. So I mean, that makes me wonder when we're talking about the issues around any of these drugs or therapies, does there need to be a standard, an additional standard, because the societal impact could be so great that goes beyond just will it destroy my liver, will it do damage to my brain, and is a sort of what does this do for sort of ability inequality? Do you think that is the case?
So.
No one asks, if a heart transplant
I
is going to
make. I think there are a million different ways in which we have inequality in the world, and cognitive enhancement is a tiny little drop in the ocean of inequality, and I wouldn't want to somehow privilege cognitive enhancement to put the brakes on it if we're trying to address the issue. I think if you're trying to address the issue of inequality, you have to address the issue of inequality, not by trying to ban technological advances and medical advances that can be incredibly promising across society. I think you have to address the root causes of inequality rather than the additional opportunities for it. Now, it's an interesting question, which is if suddenly we discovered, unlike the leveling that occurs with modafinil, it turns out that the really intelligent people are the only ones who actually get the boost, and suddenly there is kind of a superpower that you could have just for a small few, that would be really remarkable. It would be contra everything we've learned so far, but it'd be remarkable and it might change the conversation somewhat. But I think, from my perspective, what I'd rather do, rather than putting the brakes on it, is increase access and availability so
even
that
if
people...
that entails a little bit of creative destruction.
Well, why would it cause creative destruction?
One thing, actually, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with the neuroscientist Oliver Sacks. And he wrote a really beautiful book called Hallucinations, where in one of the chapters he described his own experimentation with psychedelics, as well as his own use of, I think they were some sort of, it was in his early career, so I don't know what the speed of choice was at the time. But he actually, he credited that with unlocking his brain and actually unlocking his ability to become a high empath and maybe even increasing his powers as a neuroscientist and probably increased his creative output as well. And I read this and I thought, wow, what would Oliver Sacks have been like if he hadn't had that chapter?
Right.
And interestingly, I think I thought it was particularly interesting that he waited until his 80th decade of life before revealing this. And I wonder, it just made me question how prevalent is this really, and if so, is there anything we can learn from these stories?
Yeah, you wanted to.
But a lot of people say about LSD too, right?
I just wanted to remind one thing, and that is that it is not always necessary to take a pill to enhance your intellectual capability. There is increasing scientific evidence that physical exercise has immense impact on our intellectual capability. And we are now learning more and more about the mechanisms. And there are papers published in very, very good journals where it looks like in some conditions physical exercise helps to even repair mutations. Almost like a fantasy, but might be true.
Yeah, astronauts have reported that once they get a chance, when we think about superhuman, I was thinking about, well, preparing for this session, what does it mean to transcend our humanity? What does it mean for us to think about being larger than ourselves? Escaping from the borders of the body and becoming something maybe larger than how we are now. And astronauts report that when they get a chance to see the Earth from far away, they have many, there are many after effects of that mimic what people experience using psychedelic drugs like LSD or psilocybin. And I think any sort of, I think to your point, there are many mechanisms by which we can temporarily expand the mind and then sort of live maybe our daily life in a different way. And I think it's a fascinating question.
And of course, when we are taking pills and the ones which affect dopamine system or serotonergic system, then we are actually a little bit playing with the fire, because on the left side we have cognitive enhancement. On the right side, we have addiction.
Although so far, there's been no evidence of any addiction with modafinil.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. But then there
There are
are
other drugs that
amphetamine,
may, yeah.
many others which
Right.
temporarily enhance the mental capability, but then you are in the addictive state.
Right, which is I think why, I wouldn't have voted yes on the first question. And the reason I wouldn't have voted yes on the first question is only because it doesn't say if it was medically safe and efficacious. It was the efficacy piece that from my perspective was missing. Just because something's safe doesn't mean I'm going to take it for long term. Maybe that was implied in the smart pills part of it.
Yeah.
But I think that's right, which is if we're going to have a conversation about becoming superhuman, right, pills are the tip of the iceberg and probably not the most efficient way to do so. It's a kind of indirect way of being able to boost the brain and not a particularly efficient way of doing so, whereas there are a number of other devices already that people are using, physical exercise,
Enriched environment.
enriched environments, being read to as a child,
Music, love.
all sorts of things that are enhancing. So when you get to the ethics of the conversation, when you try to figure out, is it cheating? I noticed that a number of people thought it was cheating if somebody undergoes brain therapy beforehand. There are students who use musical therapy, which enhances their brain and it enables them to better remember their work, or they use different techniques that they've learned that enable them to store and retrieve memory better than other students do. And simply using those techniques helps them to do better on the exams. And so what makes those students not cheating or those students cheating versus the ones who take drugs cheating? What is it that makes people think that there are certain lines of enhancement that counts and don't?
Cult of productivity or some sort of
natural honed talent.
Shame around maybe improvement of oneself. I mean, I'll just give a personal example. I remember when I first started discovering meditation, I remember thinking to myself, I can't believe this is legal, because it was so transformational.
This was just plain meditation.
Just sitting and paying attention to my breath for a few minutes a day. And I remember this was about 5 years ago when I made the pledge to myself that would become a daily practice. I kept that to myself for a pretty long time. It felt like a pretty private decision. I don't know. I think it speaks to something. It's somehow bucketed along with these other types of enhancements. And I think it was a big day for me when I decided that on the company calendar I was going to put meditation on the calendar for 10 minutes a day.
That
and
other
when I would
people could
disappear,
see,
that I would say that's why I'm disappearing.
But would you put a prescription for this drug we've been talking about on there? I mean, that is.
That happens to not be my daily practice.
Yeah.
I can.
But if it were, let's say.
That's
kind of a line.
It's a good thought experiment. I mean, I think on the spectrum of what we consider private, I do think that things that are viewed as medication are viewed along with health and oftentimes bucketed with privacy. Yeah.
So meditation is a practice which takes work to learn. And now there are devices like EEG devices that allow you to not have to actually learn the practice of meditation, be able to sort of shortcut the practice of meditation. And if you were doing it that way, which is you had shortcutted it such that you don't actually have to practice, would you put it on the company calendar? Would you feel as good about it?
I think a part of me might feel like I was cheating.
Right.
Yeah.
But
you know what though? You also.
Well, I mean, so the fact that you're
let's
proud
dig
of it,
into
right?
this.
I mean, so the fact that you're proud of it makes me think it's because you have to work, right?
Because I have to work. It's the cult of productivity.
That's right. Exactly.
I worked for it.
And so you're okay with putting it on the calendar, whereas I bet if you hacked it, which is the kind of equivalent of taking drugs, people feel like it's taking a shortcut and that we shouldn't be able to take a shortcut, that we should have to work just as hard as the next person. And those shortcuts are what's cheating, right? And I want to say, that's sort of what we're about, is figuring out ways to do things more efficiently.
No one got mad when we
so
started building roads from A to B to help us get there
and
faster.
modern medicine and sort of everything we do has enabled us to shortcut and make things more productive and more efficient. So the fact that we're doing it with cognitive enhancements, great. We should celebrate that and put that on the company calendar too. I'm hacking my brain for 10 minutes a day instead of I'm practicing
brain
meditation.
Hacking time.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk next year about that.
No, I believe but anyway, look, we're talking about what externally could help. Okay, so I'm not a firm believer in doing something internally because, as you said, we don't know what is the effect of all of this over a period of time, because there is no such research today to prove that what we're doing is right or wrong. Okay? But externally, I think what we could do. For example, Today, digitally, you have so much of, through digital technologies, whether it's Internet of Things or big data, there is so much of data that we could gather from our own body. And if you are able to probably tomorrow use data to, today we have a lot of wearables, okay, which can help us. But tomorrow if you want to insert something in the body which will help us get a lot more data, and that will help us improve our own efficiency. Probably it's giving us from an external side a lot more insight into the body. I would be okay with that.
Okay, actually, this is something that I wanted to touch on too, is, let me go back to my meditation practice, as the example. I think for me, when I started to do that, when I started to practice that way, I started to realize how, and transcending our humanity, yeah? I started to realize just how much of consciousness wasn't happening to me, and was something that I had the ability to modulate. And that's maybe a typical...
What do you mean?
That I had a choice about how I would feel about certain things.
I see.
And I think that medication can also have this effect of giving us choice where we believe that choice doesn't exist anymore. And I think that it doesn't matter how you get there, but once you open up that idea that I'm not trapped inside here anymore, that I have agency over the way that I choose to experience my worldview, I think that that's a very transformational thing. And maybe once we start to practice that or get there, however we get there, then we unlock an ability that's innate within ourselves to do that. And wouldn't
why
we
does
all
it
want
matter if it's innate?
Well,
and let me give you the
to
example.
Me, to me, it matters because my work is about unlocking. It feels authentic to me. That's just my own personal thing because I love to. For me, working with stem cells and working with what's naturally within our bodies is extremely actualizing. I suppose.
So the reason I say that is modafinil. It has been suggested through a number of studies may actually create motivation where it does not naturally exist. And so the reason people may become more productive when they are using modafinil is because they lack motivation. And they take the pill and suddenly they have motivation and they're able to work and they're able to concentrate and they're able to engage. And imagine that. I'm sure many of us wake up in the morning and you're just like, I am not motivated today. You take a pill and you're motivated. There's nothing authentic really about it. It's not your innate ability to be...
Well, your experience of motivation is...
It feels authentic.
It feels authentic,
but drugs can actually give you that kind of transcendent
there was this
experience.
beautiful article in the New York Times. It was an op-ed piece because in the United States, there's a whole debate going on right now about legalization of marijuana. And
absolutely.
Yeah, and so a lot of it is about medicalizing marijuana, and there are many medical benefits that can be listed, and that's why it's prescribed for many people. But this person, I don't remember his name, but he wrote a book about this where he said, it was good for him for coming out and admitting this, but he said the thing that was missing was talking about the feeling of euphoria that he had and how that helped him become a better caretaker for his wife who was declining in health. And maybe this is just something that people don't feel comfortable talking about in the United States.
The question is, does Superman feel a sense of satisfaction when he, catches the trolley car, or is it just another day? I mean, if you are aided by a pill or a therapy.
Should Superman take off his cape?
Well, he can't have a normal life,
So if I take modafinil and I'm able to overcome a writer's block and have motivation for the day, I still feel the same sense of accomplishment when I've actually finished the thing that I was having a hard time starting. Or if I'm able to be awake when I arrive in a country that I'm totally jet lagged in, I feel just the same sense of accomplishment. I've simply enabled myself to do so. So it doesn't rob me of it, but definitely, especially because of the powerful analogy from sports where we want to celebrate kind of honed hard work and natural talents, it seems like people carry that over into cognitive enhancement too, which is they want to celebrate people who work hard
but
to
is
hone
a
their
genetic
natural
predisposition
talent. Which is just another enhancement maybe that their parents got together who were both really intelligent and endowed their child with some a genetic advantage.
Just a hypothetical thing. So how would you justify, for example, let's say I'm a tennis player, okay. I don't feel good today, so I just take a performance drug and go and play and win the match, okay. And at the end of it, we come to know that today, you don't know whether you won because of the performance-enhancing drug or whether the other way around. Okay.
Yeah.
How would you go about justifying this?
Mart, what do you think?
Is there any way that you can go and justify it to the society?
You brought sports into the conversation, so I want you to answer.
I'm a big fan of sports and advocate all the time for the exercise. You can take some drugs or some doping intentionally.
Right.
But you might take some of the things not knowing that you take, because many plants, especially in this area of the world, contain a lot of very, very active drugs. I'll give you one example from the history. It turns out that in India, in Ayurveda, they have described a disease called Kampavada. And if you read that, you realize that they describe 2,500 before Christ Parkinson's disease in great detail. Remember, Parkinson's described the disease in 1817.
Sure.
And more surprising is that they also describe the treatment to use the extract of a common bean. And now it turns out it contains high concentration of levodopa.
Right.
So they had modern treatment, actually, 4,500 years ago. So we find a lot of interesting things in the nature, and I think in addition to develop the chemistry, etc., we should go more and more back to the nature and analyze the already existing very, very influential components, because they have survived in evolution and are sort of, in a way, good for us.
Yeah. Can I also answer this? I mean, I think that's right, which is maybe there's an artificial divide between the person actually intended to take versus the things that they're taking anyway. Tennis is a game, right? And we're spectators, at least I am. I'm not a tennis player, maybe you are. And we've chosen as spectators what game it is that we want to watch and what the rules of that game are that we want to pay for tickets for. Sure. And we've decided that when it comes to tennis, when it comes to baseball, that what we want to watch is people who are not doped, who have to work hard and practice, and there are certain kinds of doping that we're okay with and certain kinds we're not, and that's what we pay for our tickets to watch. Sure. And we could have decided otherwise, right? I mean, we could decide we want to watch baseball, which is steroid-based baseball, instead of baseball, and that's what we want to pay for tickets for because we want to see people hit home runs all day long, and that would be more fun for us, but we haven't decided that. But we're not in a game, at least, I mean, some people believe we are, but we're not, I don't think.
Not quite the same.
And given that we're not in a game, I think our purpose is, in part, cognitive enhancement, right? It's the advancement of humanity. It's increasing our productivity. It's increasing our capacities of use of our brain and use of our consciousness and use of kind of our broader capabilities. Right. And so I think it's different than tennis.
I agree. From a leveling point of view, I agree with you. As long as it's a leveler, I genuinely believe that it's fair. Okay. But if it is finally looking at the outcome, and if it's in a match, and you find that the match actually had a positive outcome for a player if he or she had taken a particular performance-enhancing drug, then the thing completely changes, right?
I think this speaks to your idea of, well, that's a violation of the rules, and therefore it doesn't give us the dopamine rush as spectators of having someone play the game the way we've designed it. But I think your question earlier, I think, was also quite interesting. How would I feel if I were to win a game of tennis knowing this? And I think that also speaks to this, something that I'd love for us to speak more about here, which is what are we striving for in our own experience of life? What do we want out of life? Do we want to get the feeling of accomplishment from winning a game of tennis? Do we want to fully explore the possibilities of our own consciousness? Do we want to see what happens if we don't enhance, what exactly do we, I think that's the deeper question here is how do we want to experience our own humanity as we're alive as humans right now?
Yeah, I want to get a chance to make sure the audience gets to ask some questions if there are any. Is there anyone who has a question? Okay, we have a person here in the front.
So taking a step back from the question of whether it's moral to enhance yourself or whether there are health consequences for the individual, is it possible that the culture of cognitive enhancement is a symptom of a culture-wide nervous breakdown? Mm-hmm. Like in the face of globalization and automation, we're dealing with more and more uncertainty about our jobs, about the world. And so we just turn to the one thing that we can control, which is inside the boundaries of our body and mind.
Great question.
Yeah. I mean, so I think that's a wonderful question. I think it builds in some ways on what you were asking about, what kind of life do we want to live. I think a fair worry about cognitive enhancement is if it's some sort of race toward a dystopia, and is there something wrong with enhancing ourselves? No, we do it all the time, and that's part of what it means to be human. Is there something wrong about living in a society where in order to keep up, you have to enhance, and you have to enhance in ways that don't feel authentic to you, that don't enable you to experience life to the fullest in the way that you want to, that don't allow you to experience an unenhanced and unaltered life, an unnatural in many ways, although I hate that word because everything we do is kind of beyond nature. So I think it's a wonderful question because it is a symptom of a culture that is racing and that doesn't take a lot of time for self-reflection and for celebrating what we already have naturally, what we already are endowed with. And yet it also is a culture that recognizes there's very little that's natural about this room, about the clothes we wear, about the health and medicine that we have today. And so we're on a continuum where we want to get off the kind of rat race, and if there are limits that we want to place on any of this so that you, in order to keep up, don't have to, I think is the question, because I think we want to create a society in which, from my perspective, you're able to enhance, but it isn't a prerequisite for participating in society to enhance in certain ways.
So let me ask a follow-up, and I'm interested in what you all think. What is to be done? I think that's a very interesting point, but what is to be done about that, and who's responsible for is it regulators? Is it companies who say, I'm not going to hire someone who is on a smart pill? Is it scientists saying, warning sign, this is bad?
Yes.
Where does the responsibility lie? Everyone.
Yes.
Everyone is
I mean,
responsible.
I think
Okay.
yes. I think we can't leave it to regulators. We can't leave it to elites. We can't leave it to scientists. I think what we should expect from each of the different kind of constituents is that information about kind of what we know be provided in the most publicly accessible way in order to enable societal and democratic deliberation about what limits we want to place, how we want these things to be incorporated, how we don't want them to be incorporated, how we can avoid a kind of coercive culture in which there's a race to use things that we don't yet know what the effects are, and that we don't feel locked into having to take things. I think right now, the drugs aren't there yet, the devices aren't there yet, but they're coming.
Right.
And so now is the time to be having those conversations.
And you agree? You're
I
in
think
the
we can't
field.
make these decisions alone, and no one's going to do it for us. I couldn't agree more. I think it's important for regulators, for scientists, for conceptual artists, for all of the types of ways of the methods of human inquiry to be involved in processing this very real technology we have coming up on our hands.
Do you agree that it's
I basically agree what you
society-wide-
say, but I want to stress that I think we should, because these are complex questions and contain a lot of scientific information. Mm-hmm. And if we neglect the scientific background, we are in trouble.
Agreed.
Yeah, but we have,
And that is not always so easy. For example, you know that from modern history with genetic engineering. We know that a significant part of Europe is against using genetic engineering.
Right. It's very, very important to note, though, that some of this research is being currently not funded because of social stigma. Okay. And so, for example, we're only just starting to see some clinical trials exploring the use of psilocybin for PTSD, for example. That if research funds are being blocked, we no longer have at our disposal scientific evidence one way or the other.
So
and I think it's important for us
and
to
academic institutions.
I think it's
can
very, very
help
important for
direct.
us to not block the research funds towards helping us actually arm ourselves with data.
And political decisions are very often made based on non-scientific information.
Okay, yeah. But also consumers are a part of it. I mean, if you look at what's happened with antibiotics, for instance, when someone is sick, it's, there's a rush to fix the problem, even if globally. What were you
No,
going to say?
I was just going to say that this particular whole concept itself is pretty evolutionary. Okay, it will happen. It will happen over a period of time, and I think as much as there is a responsibility of the government and the society at large to put laws and give some guiding principles, I genuinely believe it is the superhuman himself or herself who has to bring in that moral responsibility, because we need to know where do we need to transcend the boundary, and where do we need to stop it.
I think we have another question over here. If you could identify yourself, please, that'd be great.
Yes, Brian Keene, Yulmart. I'm an American. I've been living in Russia for 20 years. Spent a lot of time in the Alps. 97 years old. I'm only joking.
He's very young looking. 97.
Yes, I look very young.
Spry.
Because I haven't been living in America, which I think is over-medicated, taking too many pills. What you've said, and I agree with the Finnish speaker, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. I go to
Mart.
Finland quite often, is that everything that we're trying to enhance upon is inside of our bodies, inside of our brain. And perhaps, this meditation 5 minutes a day, perhaps we should spend more time focusing on what is happening to you at that moment, that we can enhance each individual life, be it hiking the Alps, drinking fresh water, eating more fruits and vegetables, whatever it may be. As opposed to, we now have in America a generation of Americans who've grown up overdiagnosed with attention deficit disorder. My brother suffered from this. From the day he was born, my stepmother said he had a yellow dye allergy. So he couldn't eat anything with yellow dye. Then it was pills. So his entire life was ADD, and then it was counter ADD. I mean, I call it the epidemic of the alphabet in America. And was this good for America? Has this helped any cognitive enhancement in America? So I think this desire to always it's a very American thing, to always solve everything with a pill or a quick regime, the washing of the hands of the gels in America. Everywhere you go in America, you get change, you wash your hands. Breaks down the whole immune system. Superhuman could actually come from behavioral change. I don't think from the pills and
Yeah,
stuff.
I think to just encapsulate that, does this the potential of this kind of technology exacerbate our issues around?
Yeah, there were two things that I really wanted. You said hiking in the Alps. Studies have shown that just using your peripheral vision, connecting with your own peripheral vision, which happens when you're at seasides or on mountaintops, being able to see something that's a little bit further from your face than what typically people hold their phones or computer screens, can have huge benefits for how we experience life. Yeah. And when you said what you said about modafinil and being able to be present at a meeting instead of experiencing jet lag, I was thinking to myself, well, is the joy that's experienced there just being able to feel the presence? That what we know about meditation is that just being present in the moment can be a very joyful experience. It can be very transformational. And so what I'm wondering is maybe are we just honing in on what we're really thirsty for in this maybe nervous breakdown is
But there may be other ways to get there.
Well, let's not, the paths can be different, whether you live close, if not everyone has the Alps, but maybe we all have the ability to go outside and look at the horizon, and experience and find and discover the ways that we can actually connect with presence and connect with the joy that's available to us at any given moment by maybe superseding our humanity for a millisecond or two.
I think there was a question back here.
You have a couple, yeah.
Hang on, we're going to get a mic here.
Thank you very much. My name is Brian Michael Galvin. I'm a journalist for Beijing Review. This question is for all of you, but mainly for Ms. Farahany. Ms. Farahany's analogies remind me a lot of Aldous Huxley's novel, The Brave New World, especially how you talk about drugs, and it reminds me a lot of Soma, for example, the use of Soma, and also reminds me of the use of genetic engineering and class segregation. Think about the future, all of you. Can the use of smart drugs and genetic engineering lead to a society that amuses itself to death? Or now that we have the tools such as CRISPR, to edit the gene drives of a host of insects or anything. What do you see society becoming if we pursue unbridled progress and enhancement? Thank you.
I think the dystopias that people worry about are fair, right? I mean, I think it depends on who's making the choices, right? I mean, if you have an elite few, if you have, if you empower a few people to make choices for all of us, and that what they're trying to maximize for humanity is productivity above all else, and none of the virtues that we hear about enjoying the horizon or anything else. If it isn't about maximizing happiness, if it's just about maximizing productivity, we have that fear. For the most part, we don't live in that world, right? We don't live in a world in which a few people are making the decisions for all of us, and we don't have to live in that world because we outnumber those few. And so if we don't want that world, if we don't want the brave new worlds, the way to ensure that is by deciding what limits, if any, we want to impose, and what purposes for which we want to enhance and what purposes we don't. I use an EEG device which enables me to meditate, and I like it because it's faster and easier to achieve the same outcomes for me that you may be experiencing with meditation. I get the same benefits, I get the peace, I get the presence, and I didn't have to kind of go through the long process of learning meditation. I was able to sort of train my brain to get there, and I love the effects of it. Some other people may not, right? Some other people may enjoy the accomplishment of getting there without technological assistance, and each of us has our own path to figure out how we want to use technology, how we want to use drugs, how we want to use devices, unless it's imposed upon us. We can avoid that through a process of democratic deliberation and social decision-making around what the limits of these types of drugs and devices should be.
Mart, do you agree with that? Does this road lead
I would
directly
rather
to the...
comment maybe the genetic engineering and CRISPR-Cas. So remember about 15 years ago when the NIH director and US President and Prime Minister of England came together and announced the sequencing of the human genome. It's about 15 years ago. Everybody thought, also scientists at that moment, that, oh, in 10 years we will know everything. We can treat the diseases, etc., etc. Now we are 15 years. What is the situation?
Yeah, we're joking that it's called
We
Ebrum's
still
law
don't
instead of
know
Moore's law.
what 50% of the genes are doing. We still don't know how many genes we have.
Yeah.
So I'm stressing the genetic complexity of human being. We have used genetic engineering since 1973. We have used that in bacteria, in yeast, in plants, in worms. I give you one example. We all want to live long life. We know that Methuselah was living very, very long. So geneticists have tried to find out how long a worm can live, because worm genes are very well known. They mutated every single gene which affected longevity and doubled the lifespan of the worm. However, the quality of the life of this worm was miserable, totally miserable.
How do we know what worm quality of life is?
Beyond being a worm.
What that means is that actually we don't know what we should change genetically to become a Superman. We might change one gene, but that gene has interactions with many other genes. What we do not know.
Right.
So we actually were generating.
Yeah, I almost feel like, I really want to try and answer your question because, you asked, are we going to be in some sort of loop of some sort of dystopian loop in which we somehow forget what the meaning of life is supposed to be? Is this sort of at the heart of your question? Like we're going to be exercising some sort of infinite loop that somehow misses what the real point of being alive is. And I think that's what I'd really love to make sure that we don't forget to talk about here, which is just, if a cognitive enhancement is just about extending the life of the worm, so to speak, as opposed to really giving ourselves a chance to transcend our own humanity and think about what we want out of life. I think these dystopian realities become more of a possibility if we don't actually ask the tough questions of why do I want to be alive? Why do I enjoy playing tennis? My fiance and I spent an inordinate amount of time making wedding invitations. You might ask, why did we do that? Why did we do that? Because it brought us joy. And it was fun for us to connect with how to make things. And so I would ask everyone to just, I think we have to remember that self-reflection is important, and we have to ask ourselves, before we think about how to enhance the abilities of our brain, we should ask ourselves, well, why do I want to be here? What do I want out of life?
But to be clear, you can enhance many of those things too. Right? I mean, so the drugs we're talking about today are not just to make you smarter. There are drugs, for example, that we're already using, like propanolol, which is a beta blocker, which is used in a number of clinical studies and a number of research studies to extinguish fear memories, which is a form of enhancement. So people who suffer a traumatic event, a victim of sexual assault, a person who's in combat, and is given one of these drugs, in some studies it's shown that they will semantically remember, literally remember what happened, but the fear and the emotional trauma associated with it is disassociated, so that they don't become one of the 1/3 of sexual assault victims who actually suffer from PTSD. And so it is an enhancement. It is changing the brain. There are other drugs that do different things to memory, whether improving memory or extinguishing certain kinds of memory, trying to erase the face of a person in your memory and disaggregate it from your learning calculus from that person, because you now despise that person, and so now you're able to remember calculus without the trauma that's associated. All of these are forms of enhancement. So if we're talking about enhancement, we're not just talking about making you smarter. It may be about giving you a fuller and more joyful life.
I think we have a couple questions here. Noah here? Oh,
And you had
sorry.
a question back there too for a while.
Okay, great. We might. I'll come to you after. Sorry.
Noah Keating. As parents, we read to our children to teach them things. We take them to sports classes, piano lessons. Is there a difference between that sort of raising our children and giving them modafinil, for example, to help them focus more? Say they're having trouble. Like, what is there a difference? And if there is a difference, what is that difference?
The biggest difference right now is that we don't know what the long-term effects, the potential negative side effects and wiring their brain. Now, of course, we don't know what the potential negative side effects of taking them to piano lessons and exposing them to certain things and not others.
Depends on
but the
piano
bigger
teacher.
thing that people worry about is, if there's some long-term health consequence, side effects that we don't yet know about for certain kinds of things like transcranial direct current stimulation and drugs. True for everything else we do from parenthood, but it seems like people feel like those are safer. That seems to be the biggest difference, I think. It's a question of safety, and given that you're imposing it upon a to make the autonomous choice, that's more problematic.
Okay, we're getting close here, so I want to make sure we have one.
That one?
Sorry. I'm sorry. You can come up.
Sorry, I just want to make a comment, which is I think when we think about superhuman, it's not about personal perspectives. It's about the species. So not about one person, how you feel about it. It's how the human species think about it. And it's not about 5 years. It's about 100 years. So I think people think about genetic engineering. It's also a very different thing about taking a pill, because it's going to change the genetic pool of the whole species. And I think it's very true. It's not a game, because there's no rules, because it's about evolution. We are not so different from any other species. We're just simply subjected to evolution selection of random mutations. But right now, we're at the point of we are starting understanding the genetic meaning of our life. Also, we have the tool to change it. So I think it's really a decision of the species. I think we're going to do it, because the only meaning of life is to survive. And to survive longer and better. That's the only way you're going to be selected.
It's tinkering with the genetic material of, with CRISPR technologies, for example, of microorganisms, plants, animals, humans, equivalent. Is tinkering with them for the sake of research, or for the sake of education, or for the sake of entertainment. Equivalent, right? These questions, no one's going to answer them for us, and we have to do the work to answer them, I think, in a cross-disciplinary manner.
I think that's a great concluding point. Mart, do you want to just add something here? We don't want to.
I just wanted to add that there is a very clear consensus, at least in the scientific community, that nobody will touch the germ cells.
Yeah.
And I think this is a very, very important consensus.
So, okay, we've gotten way more questions out of this session than answers, but I think that's the point. If you are at an academic institution or a government, please come and talk to our panelists about how you can fund more research on the effects of this kind of treatment, because I think that's a place to start. So thank you very much. Thanks to our panelists.
Thank you.